Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. You thought I was bored, didn't you? Nah, I'm just playing. I'm not bored. I'm excited. So we got Wesley versus Leinier Domínguez Pérez for the U.S. Championships, round 6, jumping off. So as always, to my people that are coming from the Philippines, I will say Maliganyong Pagdating sa mga chess, ladies and gentlemen. Magandang ro. It is morning time. Almasal tayo. We have not reached lunch yet. I appreciate you guys very much. Maraming salamat. Posa na nunawod inga king my video. A king my kaibigan. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Anybody who is coming from Cuba or who does speak Spanish, I will say bienvenidos al ajedrez, damas y caballeros. Muchas gracias para ver mi video. Mis amigos. Vamos, let's go. Let's get it rolling. If you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. All right, so we got D4, D5, C4. Many different things we can do. I mean, we have E6, knight to F6. Those are going to be pretty much the most common. I mean, sometimes you can see bishop to F5, like the Baltic, Queen's Gambit declined Baltic. But we do see the Queen's Gambit accepted. That is also another choice. And you have to be very careful not to try to hold on to the pawn. We do see knight to F3 by white. And then knight does come to F6. And then we do see E3, E6, and then bishop does take C4. And some of you guys might be wondering, well, why doesn't black try to hold on to the pawn? Well, it becomes very, very hard to hold on to. And that is the short answer. But if we go back, pawn takes C4, and then after knight to F3, if you do have something like B5 trying to hold, you know, white is just going to successfully be able to try to break that down. And it is going to become basically impossible for you to hold. The only way that you can actually legitimately hold this pawn is if you automatically initially play some type of a Slav situation, a Slav, or white just doesn't attack your position like they're supposed to, and you're just able to magically hold the pawn. But if you do see B5, you're going to see A4. And then C6 is going to come, pawn takes B5, and then knight does come to C3. And as you can see, there is a lot of pressure here. You cannot go A6 because the knight is going to be taken here, and you're going to be sad because the rook is undefended behind that pawn. So just one of many ways. But like I said, you have to basically depend on white not playing as aggressively as they should. So we do see E3, E6, bishop takes C4. We do see A6. Very clear intention of trying to push B5 at some point, possibly, not always, but we do have castles by white. We got C5. You guys know C5 is coming. You know, this is just too nice of a pawn chain to just, you know, allow it to continue to live. So we do see pawn takes C5, bishop takes C5. We got queen taking D8 with check, forcing the king over on D8. We do see bishop back down to E2. King comes down to E7, just trying to free up, you know, the rank for the rook to swing over. We do see knight B to D2, and then we do have B6. And we actually have reached a point in the game that if you don't want to pause the video and try and guess a really, really nice move for white to play here, go ahead and do so. Okay, so before we get into that move, I'll just kind of go through and show you, you know, what is played through the game. And the novelty actually does come up right now. We do see knight to C4, and then we do have knight up to C6, and knight to C6 is the novelty of the game. And, you know, you can see both white and black are both developing their pieces. But if we do go back, knight B to D2, we saw B6. As you guys noticed from the previous position that we showed, knight was able to come to C6. One of a really nice way to prevent or hinder the development for black is actually going knight to E5. So if you did guess knight to E5, you would have recognized that the knight really ideally does want to come to this square. And knight to E5 isn't only just trying to prevent this knight, but it is also trying to redirect and attack this this bishop. If the bishop is able to be captured, you are going to be isolating one of black's pawns. So it's actually pretty deep and pretty positional to be thinking of knight to E5. And it is actually just the absolute best move that can be played in the position. You know, the bishop would come to B7. You see knight down to D3. And then you would actually just be continuously harassing black, and trying to clear your own pieces out of, for development. The bishop would come back to d6. You'd see knight to c4, further harassing. Bishop would come back to c7. You'd see b3. Rook would swing over to d8, and then you see bishop to a3. And as you guys can see, you do kind of have your pieces clumped up just a little bit as black. You are all the way ready to go as white. So it's just a very aggressive position to be in. But like I said, we did see, knight developing to c6, and then we do see bishop to d2. We have b5, making this knight a little bit uncomfortable. You have a couple of different options, but one of the best is going to be knight c to e5. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5. You have bishop to b7. Rook f to c1. You see bishop back to d6. You got knight taking c6 or knight to c6 with check. Bishop taking c6, rook taking c6. So, as you guys can see, everything is fairly even. White does for the moment have control of this file, but black is going to immediately try to come over and contest this, because it cannot allow you as white to build up on the c file and just take over the game. So we do see rook h over to c8. Rook a comes to c1. We see rook takes c6, rook takes c6. We got king over to d7. Black is offended that your rook is where it is. And you want to be kind of careful, because you can possibly try to sidestep here, but you are going to be looking at, possible trapping of your rook, because the bishop is going to be trying to come over to c7 and trap. So definitely don't go that route. So rook does come down and retreats to c2. We see knight over to d5, and then bishop comes to f3, and you are pinning this knight down just a little bit, because this rook is undefended behind it. So solving that, the rook does come to c8. We see rook takes c8, king takes c8. We got bishop taking d5. In the position that we're in right now, you definitely have some other options, just moving some pawns or something like that somewhere. But, you definitely would possibly like to try to give black some type of a weakness. So isolating one of their pawns after bishop takes d5, pawn takes d5, it does strap black with a little bit of a weakness here. But the only unfortunate thing about the position is that you can't really too much exploit it. If black never moves their pawn down off of this light square, you're going to have a really, really hard time of trying to attack it as black or as white. The king is going to come down, and it's going to save the pawn. So you don't really have a chance to try to get your king up to attack it. So it's a weakness, but it's not really a weakness that you can really do anything about. So we do see bishop to c3, and then we have g6. As you can see, black has all of their pawns on the opposite color to white's bishop. Also being on the opposite color of their own bishop, you can see that this black bishop has complete movability. So we do see king over to f1. And you actually do have to kind of be careful in this particular position, because you definitely don't want to end up like Bobby Fischer from 1972 World Championships. And he went ahead and went bishop takes h2, and then Spassky went g3 and was kind of like, what are you doing? You just trapped your bishop. Like, this isn't club chess. So yes, anyway. Going back to after king to f1, we do see king down to d7. King comes up to e2, and that bishop takes is still live because, it is still a trap, because the king can actually, work its way back. If you do see bishop takes h2, you're just going to be looking at g3, h5. King comes to f3, h4, and then the king is going to nestle itself on g2. So still fairly dangerous. So don't do that. So we do see king to e2, king comes to e6. And then so that we can further move our king away from the position and more centralize it, we do see h3. Because if the king is too far away, then it is not actually trapping the bishop, because this h-pawn can actually move down and free this bishop. So we do see h5. King comes to d3. We see bishop down to c5, c3 or c5. Sorry. F3 comes. We see f5, b3, and so as you can see, basically white is doing the same thing. They have almost all of their pawns on light squares, except for this one. This one is going to be just a little bit more tough. We do see bishop back to e7. We got a4. Bishop to c5, pawn takes b5, pawn takes b5, and then we do have bishop to d4, offering the first trade. And by no means do you want to take this bishop, because the king is going to be taking, and then you are just in a complete superior position than black is. You're going to have to maintain contact with this king. So the king is going to have to go to d6. And you literally just have so many reserve tempo as white, and you do have the ability to try to freeze black's position. You can play either f4 or h4. Either one of these movements, either this or this, is going to make it really, really hard for black to start moving their pieces. You absolutely cannot move this pawn anywhere, and you really only either have this pawn or this pawn. But after you make this move, you are just running out of tempo or tempi, because you do have g3. So like I said, even though sometimes it might seem like the position is fairly equal, you have to be very careful when you get into a king and pawn endgame, because if your opponent actually literally has more moves than you do pawn-wise, then you are going to be in a really, really bad position. So you definitely do not want to get into this. But going back to what we had, the bishop did come to d4 offering a trade. Of course, Wesley So does want to trade. But Leinier Domínguez, calculating all of this in-game stuff that I just showed you, he is not trying to trade. So bishop does come back to e7. We see bishop down to c3. Bishop comes back to c5. Bishop comes back to d4. Bishop goes back to e7. We see bishop up to g7. Bishop comes back to c5. And then we see bishop down to d4. And the interesting thing about the position is, even though you have varied your moves, we have just reached a threefold repetition. So they have drawn by threefold repetition. So that is that game. For all of the Wesley So lovers, I mean, I know that you wanted to see bishop takes d4 and getting into this type of a situation, or even this type of a situation, and then Wesley could have went on to win. And unfortunately, they only have one game that they play per day, so you don't have just a lot of options as far as like choosing games and stuff like that. So we will see what happens tomorrow. So I guess in this one, if I can say this correctly, Malakas C Wesley So at Leinier Domínguez Pérez in this one. So I will go ahead and get the good mornings for my people in the Philippines. So maanyong buntag, mayad na agahan, nainbeg na bigat, masantos ya kabasan, marhe na aga, buenos dias, maayong aga, mapia na uma, kapian kapano dios, mayap a abak, mayad na aga. Yes, mapia agay, mapia kapapita, my big abukla, marjana bunta, Mariana Buntag, Maria Mainat, Maupena Aga Kasanyangan Si Ilubi, Salam Assalamu Alaikum, merci to you, and muchas gracias, mis amigos, para ver, or para mirar. Appreciate you guys very much for watching my stuff. Makito Tayo Mamaya, and I will see everybody next time.